Hello, welcome to the Cassandra Project, your source of actionable steps you can take to help avert nuclear war, as well as vital information you and your family can use to survive an actual nuclear war, should worst case scenario play out. My name is Tim Guay, and today we'll look at the Doomsday Clock and the risk of nuclear war. The time of unprecedented danger. That is what the opening statement, when the announcement by the Bulletin of the atomic scientists, when they set the doomsday clock to 90 seconds to midnight, the closest it's ever been, even closer than the Cuban Missile Crisis. So, okay, so unprecedented danger? Well, maybe not. I don't know. Why should I care about what some bulletin of atomic scientists say or what this doomsday clock I hear about once a year? Is it just a little publicity thing? Is it just about pushing a political agenda? Well, when is warning of the dangers of nuclear war, climate change, and the irresponsible use of new technologies such as AI merely pushing a political agenda? If you want to view saving humanity and the rest of the planet from an existential threat as a political agenda, then by all means, for it is the political agenda that every person on this planet must have. But as for the doomsday clock itself, it was unveiled in 1947 and with the time set to 7 minutes. It was launched by the Chicago atomic scientists who had taken part in the development of the atomic bomb as members of the Manhattan Project. They later changed their name to the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists, as they published a magazine regularly that talked about all the risks related to nuclear war and would also talk about why they would set the clock the way they would. So it is set by the members of their Science and Security Board of the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists and is composed of globally recognized leaders in their relative disciplines, be it security, be it political science, be it nuclear physics, whatever it takes in order to put this report together. And they consult with the board of sponsors, which are science and security experts from around the world. So there's a lot of good thought goes into this. A lot of input goes into this by people who are highly qualified. As far as I'm concerned, they have all the chops they need in order to assess the risks and set the clock accordingly. It was designed actually as a metaphor for the approaching global catastrophe. Originally, they only looked at the risk of nuclear war. Nowadays, while the emphasis is still on the risk of nuclear war, it also factors in climate change, pandemics that are direct or indirect fault of mankind, as well as new technologies such as AI. Now, all of these are intertwined. After all, climate change could trigger a war that could go nuclear. Pandemic could be seen as an actual biological warfare attack and trigger nuclear retaliation. Artificial intelligence embedded into the control of the nuclear arsenals on either side on a launch or on warning system could accidentally initiate a nuclear launch due to some sort of computer glitch in its programming or the input it's receiving. Once you cut the human out of the loop, your risks increase exponentially, and all which together do increase the risk of nuclear war. During its history, the Doomsday Clock has changed the time to Doomsday 25 times since its original 7 minutes setting. Currently, it's set at 90 seconds to midnight. It's never been closer. And this often surprises some people who would assume that, the Cuban Missile Crisis, when we were oh so close to all out nuclear war, it would have been closer, but it was at 7 minutes to midnight. And people say, well, maybe it was because it's only set once a year and the crisis was over by then. But it doesn't explain why it was kept at 7 minutes at both at the start and the end of that year in question. Why? Well, it was a time of increased international cooperation. It just had the International Geophysical Year, and political leaders knew full well the risk of nuclear war, would do everything out of their way to avoid escalating a regional conflict into direct confrontation. There were the early talks towards new nuclear treaties, starting with the Test Ban Treaty. And so it wasn't as crucial as it is, as I'll talk about later on. As for the Cuban Missile Crisis itself, both Kennedy and Khrushchev were combat veterans who had seen the horrors of war and were determined at all costs to avoid the pressure from their respective military leaders and other hawks to start a war, a full scale war between Russia and America at that time. So they kept it from escalating. They talked to one another and came out with a compromise that allowed both sides to maintain their dignity and to totally de escalate a very dangerous situation. Afterwards, things were improved even better because one of the lessons from that was to set up a hotline between the US president and the Soviet premier so that the two leaders could talk directly to each other in the event of a crisis and be able to, without filtering through people, just come up with a solution that both could live with and would prevent the earth from falling over the abyss. So you look at that, all through the 60s and 70s and all the way into our first decade of the century, there were adults in the room in both the White House and the Kremlin. During this time, multiple nuclear arms control treaties were drafted and put into place, which really dramatically reduced the number of missiles people had, and other short, including getting rid of an entire class, the intermediate range missiles, which would reach targets in 4 minutes, which really were escalatory in that aspect of it, and reduced the size of the warheads and just made the world safer from global thermonuclear war. It does mean that there wasn't risk there. There was nuclear proliferation with Israel, India, Pakistan, North Korea all getting the bomb, which did dramatically increase the risk of a regional nuclear war. However, while catastrophic and devastating, the global impact of a regional nuclear war would pale in absolute comparison to an all-out nuclear war between NATO and the Russian Federation, with China being pulled into it. So it's this all-out nuclear war between major powers as the scenario which more than any informs the settings of the Doomsday Clock. So why do they view our situation as so dire as they advanced it to unprecedented 90 seconds to midnight? Well, I briefly touched upon that, but I'll touch upon it in greater detail, both in this video and also create videos specific to each topic that I will be covering as a follow-on in this Risk of Nuclear Wars playlist series. So, what are the key points? There is a lack of leadership in the major powers that are committed to peace and nuclear disarmament. Heck, it's quite the opposite. The neocons are running amok on both sides, for both the Russian Federation as well as the United States. It's viewed as being appeasement. Wanting peace is appeasement. Diplomacy is appeasement. And there's no one in the room that could say, wait a second. I mean, this could really lead us to disaster. So there are no adults in the room. Only these aggressive hawks are either delusional enough to feel that, the other side is going to back down. They'll accept defeat. They won't escalate to nuclear war. They don't want to see themselves destroyed. All we have to make sure is they blink first. Well, what happens if nobody blinks? Well, then we're toast, literally and figuratively. Worse still, there are some who feel that a nuclear war is acceptable. It's and it's more acceptable than giving in. That somehow it can be won. We do that first strike. Or our defenses are better than the enemy's, or their missiles won't work, or all the other things they believe and think. Well, okay, so we lose 30, 40 million people. Well, that's acceptable. This is how evil these folks are. And there's certain American politicians are, very much of that ilk, and I think you all know who they are. And so, yeah, there's the leadership is not. There's no leadership committed to peace. Nobody wants peace, other than China, but certainly between America and the Russian Federation right now, there's not much happening in that respect. So, and that there's the tearing up of the key nuclear disarmament treaties. The INF treaty, the ABM treaty, the ones that have actually been expired. Even our last final treaty, the New START treaty, has been suspended, as I've mentioned in my previous introductory video. There's now no treaties left to speak of. So now we have a new arms race. We'll have new intermediate range nuclear weapons in the mix. Russia will be mounting nukes on their Iskanders, the Americans on their Tomahawk missiles. pretty well every nuclear power is or will be engaging in extensive nuclear weapon modernization programs. You're going to have new nuclear subs. I think the Columbus is going to be a class is going to be replacing the current Trident, Ohio class, and going to come new replacements for Minutemen. And of course, the Russians have been coming up with new nuclear weapons. You know, the Satan and these new and Chinese too, both Russia and China with these hypersonic glide bombers and whatnot. So yes, we're getting right back to where we were, or even worse, because our weapons are a lot more are faster to launch and far more deadly due to their accuracy. The ongoing war in Ukraine poses an increasing risk of escalating to direct conflict between NATO and Russia. And at that point, a nuclear war becomes a near certainty as one side or the other decides to use nuclear weapons on the battlefield to stave off defeat. And once they start using tactical nukes, it's going to escalate all the way up. I've seen scenarios that show that within 4 hours of the use of a tactical nuke, we have all-out nuclear warfare between major powers. You know, I pray that's wrong, but you know, that just increases that risk to totally unacceptable level. Increased tensions in Taiwan could easily, either by accident or design, result in direct conflict between China and the U.S. with its allies, which would also encourage significant risk of triggering a nuclear war between China and the U.S., and including its regional and NATO allies, with North Korea flinging theirs into it too. Would that expand to Russia? Who knows? But a compelling argument can be made either way. I mean, there are some probably American, strategic command folks who will look at the situation and say, well, if we don't take out Russia, they'll be in charge because we'll be ruined in the nuclear war and China will be ruined in the nuclear war. So we got to take out Russia too. It's nice. We got tons of missiles there already pointed there. Why not use them or lose them? So yeah, it's it could really get out of hand. Of course, a U.S. North Korea war could easily escalate and drag China in there, which then would trigger a global nuclear war. No dialogue and to break down diplomatic channels between the U.S., Russia, and China really complicate diplomatic communications. It would make crisis de-escalation that much more difficult, especially with the attitude that negotiating and finding a compromise solution is appeasement, and even borders on treason. You're pro-Russian, or or even a traitor. A Putin stooge. This further increases the risk of an international crisis being out of control because no one wants to look weak. No one wants to have that pointed at them. This would be especially even worse in a situation where it was an election year in either the United States or the Russian Federation. And then you look at war, a regular regional war triggered by climate change has the potential of triggering regional, even global nuclear war. What if India and Pakistan start fighting over the source of water from as the glaciers in the Himalayas shrink away? That could easily spin out of control. And then you're looking at AI. I mean, right now it's been over the years, more and more automation within the respective nuclear forces of the major powers, and especially related to command and control, uh, because they're afraid what happens if the humans get taken out? What happens if humans won't push the button for out of emotions, not wanting to be a mass murderer? Then what? Well, they want to make sure that doesn't happen, so they're increasing the dependence on the computerized systems. And now with new AI systems, will take more and more of the decision making away from humans and cut us out of the loop. In the past, we've had some close calls with accidental nuclear wars being averted only because somebody said, "Wait a second, this doesn't feel like this is really happening. So let's just check to see if there's a glitch," and there would be a glitch. But now, if you take that out, what if there's a glitch in the AI? What if the AI doesn't think to mindlessly just follows its protocol and doesn't think to check there might be some glitch in the radar, some system somewhere that's detecting something due to reflection of the sun, or God knows what other reason it could happen, or a computer glitch, or somebody threw a training tape on by accident and doesn't look at that and just launches. Then what? Of course, once one side sees, thousands of missiles heading its way, then they'll launch too because they don't know if this is. Oops, sorry, accident. So sad. Too bad. No, yeah, that's gonna not gonna happen anytime soon. So an accident would trigger a full-scale nuclear war. With the increase of gain of function research by the U.S., the risk of a new pathogen, even more deadly than COVID, could escape from some lab. There is that risk. And if that happened in the wrong place and drifted into the territory of nuclear power, that could be misinterpreted as a biological warfare attack on their nation, and they could conceivably retaliate using nuclear weapons. So, looking at all these risks, is it any wonder the doomsday clock has never been closer to midnight and the apocalypse? Think about that. And think about, doing something about that to stop that. We need to restart the nuclear disarmament movement. We need to educate people on the risks out there and work on that. So, thank you, and do subscribe if you continue to want to have actionable information on the risks and effects of nuclear war and nuclear disarmament, as well as nuclear survival. Do comment below. If you want to materially support this channel, you can find me on Patreon or at Locals, and the links are below. And stay tuned for my next video. Thank you.